Good morning from Bali. I'm Kat Kabira, and today I would love to talk to you about feelings. So I'm running a course called Illumination, which is understanding your own energy body, really just understanding yourself. And the deeper wiring, the more subtle wiring, my passion is empowering those of you to really bring an awareness or a consciousness to that which is unconscious, and not just on a mental level, but on an emotional level, on a subtle energetic level, on a multidimensional level. So one thing that's really been coming up is what to do with our feelings. And I know from various courses or practices or just things that I've read, there's a lot of different approaches. And I can say this a little bit in a cheeky way as an American, that there can almost be a pressure that we're supposed to perceive things a certain way or feel a certain way, and that somehow we might be failing or doing something wrong if we're having a different experience. And I work with a lot of people who are highly sensitive and more empathic, meaning that you sense others in a physical, mental, or emotional way. And a lot of it is more like a way to protect and survive, but that's a separate story. So I'm actually, you won't see this, but where I'm filming, I'm actually sitting at my piano. I happen to be at a house where there's a piano, and I've been playing on and off since I was 4 years old. They're not very portable, so I don't get to play them all the time. But what I love about music and what the piano has always represented for me is a place where my feelings get to belong. So it's like if I'm feeling agitated, if I'm feeling moody, if I'm feeling slow, if I'm feeling confused, if I'm feeling wildly joyful, so passionate, if I want to take up space, if I want to be really quiet, like I can just play the notes, and there's a way to work with the rhythm and a way to work with the notes and the complication of sounds or the simplicity and the journey. It's the place where everything gets to belong. And a way that we can separate ourselves from ourselves, or a way that we can fragment ourselves, is by immediately looking at ourselves like, no, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And there's something wrong with us if we're not behaving, thinking, feeling according to this way that we think we're supposed to be. So, again, for my empaths, one thing I remind them, and even if you're not an empath, it's important to know the idea that you get to belong even if you're different. So if you're having a different feeling experience, everyone else is loving something and you're like, I don't really love it, like that you still get to belong in the group, even if you're having a different experience. And sometimes it actually takes guts and there's truth in allowing yourself to be different. One of my favorite fables, is it a fable? Is it a fairy tale? I'm still waking up, is the Emperor's New Clothes, right? And in the Emperor's New Clothes, like everyone in town is like, oh my God, like look at this, the king's new crown and his beautiful robes and all the jewels and oh my God, his shoes. And it takes, and no one is willing to actually admit that they don't see it, but they want to stay within that worldview and belong. And then there's like that little kid who's just like, but mommy, like the dude is naked, so sometimes we're actually owning real truth, even if it's different from what everyone else says, right? But going back to just our personal experience of having our feelings, because when we talk about meditation, a lot of time, and there's so many ways to meditate, right? And I'm not going to break them down. But it's, one thing is just watching or becoming aware of your thoughts. But on a deeper level, it's also understanding, and of course there's an intertwining between thought and emotion, is, starting to understand our waves of emotions. And there's a very big difference between our projection and how we present ourselves, the surface, versus what's really going on underneath. And when we start to understand, like, oh, there's some other things that I didn't expect to be feeling. Instead of quickly trying to judge it or manipulate it or fix it, and we are or numb out from it or dismiss it, how do we get to be with it? Even if it's something that we don't really enjoy or don't want to admit about ourselves. We could almost say that this is more like the shadow work aspect. But I personally don't like to say shadow work because if you have a core wound, like a deep belief inside that you're a bad person, which a lot of us actually, like we carry these voices inside of us, these beliefs inside of us that are like, age 2 to 4 years old. So they're very dramatic, simple statements like, I'm just a really bad person, or I'm just bad. The moment we start to do shadow work, it's like it can just get us into this darker hole. And, the whole point is like turning towards light, transforming into power. So, how can we look at these elements of ourself and actually stay neutral, to not actually get involved? Just be like, I'm going to just be aware of this part of me and let it just do its little ride. And from my understanding of somatic experiencing, so I had done some work for a long time with a somatic experiencing practitioner, is that we have these like unresolved feelings and unresolved gestures or movements in our body, that got frozen, that got suppressed, that didn't get to happen. And at some point we're trying to let them out. And so the more we get to know ourselves, it's like, oh, wow, I've got some feelings underneath that don't actually necessarily match the present situation. But there's like a much deeper rage inside and a much deeper heartbreak inside and much deeper confusion. And we could say that they're from when we were children. We could say that some of them get piled on from like being in utero, that they're inherited from, either from family or ancestry or past lives. But there's a lot of stuff underneath that's not necessarily matching the present reality. And it doesn't really work to keep like suppressing, in a way. It's like when we take that time to sit with ourselves, it's like, all right, there are things that are not in present time that are still affecting me. And in the beginning, we get very fascinated with the stories of it. But in reality, it's just like, I'm just going to sit with it and let it be like an ocean that moves through me. And I'm just going to let it move. And I think for those of you who have been sitting with yourself for a much longer time, the story becomes less interesting. Eventually we see how we're kind of part of all the stories, right? But it's just like, how do I just let this move? How do I tolerate it? So the work that I do, and this is both for those of you who have eating disorders, binge eating, anorexia, bulimia, restrictive eating, like all the ways you might control, deny, numb out with food. There's so many ways. Part of the work that I do is just teaching you to learn how to safely feel, and both to own that space in that moment, and to just like, how do you actually tolerate feeling? How do you know that you're not going to die from it? You're not going to get stuck in it? And also that it's okay to have it. And actually, this is the same work that I do with people who are also just learning to understand their energy body. So it's very important, because globally we have ways that we either try to fix things or numb out, but we don't do the more, what I would call the feminine stance of like, I'm just going to sit and really stay and learn to listen and feel. So it might be helpful to consider that your feelings have a place. Like, instead of thinking like, is this okay to have this, or is this right or wrong, or what's the best feeling to have, or the right feeling to have, we're already like trying to manipulate. And there might be that undercurrent fear of like punishment, or I need to be the best. Like, there's a lot of undercurrent things we do. And it just takes time to get to know yourself, right? And that takes time. But like, I'm just going to let myself have it, and I'm just going to let it have a place. Just like if I were to play the piano, it's like the note just gets to be a note. I'm not going to think it's a good note or a bad note. Like, I'm just going to let it have its place. And the moment we allow things just to be there, they will start to make sense. So what I was saying is that there's a way that we can walk around in a fragmented way, meaning that we're not fully here in present time. A way that we can be fragmented is like we're in the past, we're in the future, we're like in future projection, past hurt or pain or desire, regret, things that with other people, with other possibilities and astral times. That's one way we can fragment. Another way we can fragment is just by separating ourselves from ourselves. I'm not allowed to have this feeling. I'm not allowed to have this opinion. And that can show up where you almost are like allowing everyone else to have their feelings and opinions, but you're not letting yourself to have that. And there's no one right person, right? It's like it's a very interesting world of ever-changing perspective, feeling, and opinion, right? So, the idea of what is truth, that's a separate conversation. But do you dismiss yourself? Do you let other people have their reality, but yours goes away? Do you dismiss yourself in any way? And vice versa, you might have it where like your feelings and opinions and perception is the only right one and you dismiss everyone else. So we don't want to dismiss either side. Like we equally share. We're in this together. So one way to not fragment is just to allow ourselves to be here as we are without judging ourselves. There's a reason why there's so many books and meditations about like not being the judge and not being the critic. And remember that the light side of the judge is discernment. Because sometimes people can be so terrified to like have discernment that they actually just don't let themselves see things as they are. Like, just like one music note will sound one way, another music note will sound another way. One color is one way, another color is another way. To name the differences isn't judging. You're just naming it as it is. So can you just allow yourself to show up as you are and without like any judgment and really seeing what's there? And what I found personally fascinating is that on those feelings that I initially think are wrong or bad, if I really just allow them to have a place, and if I can start to feel them in my body as a wave, so even like taking any label out of like anger or sadness or jealousy, and it's like, okay, is there a temperature? Is there a rhythm to it? Is there a color to it? Is there a sound to it? What's the texture? Then suddenly it will make sense in a greater tapestry. And, one thing I personally found, and I'm going to kind of revert to having had trauma as a kid, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, transgressions. I'm sure you've heard of, what they call like a trauma brain, right? So our wiring can be really special. So one of my missions starting in like 1997, if not earlier, was like, I need to fucking see things as they are. I knew that I wasn't seeing things as they are, and that was my mission. I want to see things as they are. On a personal level, on a collective level, on a God level, I want to see. And the challenge that we can have, with wounds that we haven't, with fear, wounds, pain that we haven't met within ourselves. And it doesn't matter who you are, because a lot of times we judge like, oh, but my life wasn't bad enough, so I'm not allowed to have pain. And let me just tell you, people, like I've worked with tens of thousands of people. Everyone has pain. And again, dismissing your own pain is doing no one any favor, right? Like just get real with who you are and what you're carrying in your bag and what do you want to keep carrying and what do you just want to let go of, right? Like do not judge the pain you have. It's here, right? And your work is actually to meet what's here within you. Do not waste time comparing, being like, is my pain valid enough to let go? Of course there's that danger of like getting so involved with the story of our pain, But I'm talking to those of you who are like, it wasn't bad enough. I should just get over it. That's called dismissing yourself, okay? And we do it out of survival because we don't know, we haven't learned the tools of how to meet ourselves. I got a little passionate right there. Okay. So what I realized, having this history of trauma, I never could make sense of, like, why do I have this deep sadness, or why do I have this deep rage? And I felt like an asshole of like, but you've got this great life, it's like Instagram wonderful. Why are you so sad all the time? What's wrong with you? Or why are you so angry? Why do you want to go attack people? And it wasn't until I like just let myself have that feeling and just got out of like trying to make sense of it, where suddenly it was like, okay, I never let my sadness have a place. And this sadness was some deep feeling of like, why was I hit, or when I was so young, or this deep, I don't want to talk about my story of pain because it's not about that, but it's like, suddenly it's like, oh, I just never gave it a place. So there's a lot of stuff underneath that we might have been like, but I've mentally processed it. And there's a reason why, even like therapy nowadays has moved out of just like psychology and the mentality of it, because the mental field is just one field, but it's really about the embodied practices. There's a reason why like embodiment is like this new tagline, that's both happening in yoga, but also is in meditation, but it's also happening in like psychology and like in the trauma practices is like embodiment. How do we finally resolve our pain beyond the mental, where we can really live with ourselves in a truly light and pain-free way, where those deep charges don't keep affecting us, and that's our work. That's our work. And to not judge where it comes from, because we probably don't know yet. So my invitation to you, just on a really simple level, is to become conscious of, if you're practicing awareness of yourself, that you might have a subtle way that you dismiss what your feelings are. And what if you just let them have a place, just like a note, and just feel them as a wave, and they will start to make sense. But to not try to think like there's something wrong with you, that you have it, or there's something bad, or there's a better, right? That those are all ways that we kind of manipulate our way out of ourselves. And this is really essential, and it's something that I work with, again, with those of you who have eating disorders, like basically are not eating or overeating, or, all the ways we play. It's just like, I don't know how to handle life, and I'm rejecting it, and I'm trying to find a way, but it's not really a healthy way, right? And this is actually true even if you don't have an eating disorder. And also it's important for those of you who want to learn how to do energy work, what I teach you is whatever you're doing with your own field, you're going to do with someone else's. So if you want to like work with someone else's energy field, you've got to make sure that you're not going to go in there and try to manipulate and be like, oh, no, this is the way to do it, right? Like it takes guts to really be with ourselves and to see things as they are. And it's like learning to tolerate some really deep and different notes. And that takes courage. But why are we here, right? And it's not just like, oh, and then we go there and there's pain. It breaks us through. It breaks us through into the awareness of something that's bigger, and that joy of being that's not affected by our pain. It helps us contact that part of ourselves. And it helps us really settle in and be here and not have so much friction in our field that causes us to squirm and be uncomfortable. And it also helps us feel and receive love. Also give, but feel and receive love. So these are my Friday morning love notes. I'll call it a cat chat. take what resonates. Only take what resonates. And have a beautiful, beautiful weekend.